Okay, when we left off last time, uh, Jacob had finally had 12 children. Uh, he had uh, one daughter that we know of mixed in there, Dinah, um, and 11 sons up to this point. And as soon as we got to chapter or verse 24, we see that Rachel finally was blessed, and she was able to have Joseph. And she immediately asked for another son. Um, and in fact, that's why she named Joseph Joseph. So we'll pick back up at verse 25. Uh, and it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service, which I have done for you." So we see as soon as Jacob had a son by his favorite wife, Rachel, it was time to go. Now, it could be that it just happened to work out that that was the end of the 14 years. It may have just timed up that way. We really don't know. Verse 27, Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Then he said, "Name me your wages, and I will give it." So Jacob said to him, "You know how I have served you, and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house?" So, what Jacob's talking about here, firstly, uh, they both knew that the reason the flocks were doing so well was because God was blessing Jacob and everything that he did. So, to Laban, the flocks were doing well because of Jacob being blessed by God. Um, so he wants to do anything in his power for Jacob to stay because obviously, if Jacob is blessed by God and he's working for Laban, Laban is going to reap that blessing secondhand to himself. So he wants to keep Jacob around for that. Um, but Jacob's concern is so he's worked the 14 years so far, uh, but no actual payment, right? He worked the 14 years for Leah and Rachel. So he doesn't have any inheritance now for what he has his 12 children so far. Uh, there's no inheritance because right now they just broke even. They have themselves, but everything else there that's going to belong to Laban because he hasn't, his wages were the wives. He wasn't paid anything separate from that. So, verse 31, Laban speaking, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything if you'll do this thing for me. And then I will again keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flocks today, and let me remove from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come. When the subject of my wages come before you, every one that's not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me." So Jacob is saying for his wages, he will take the discolored sheep and goats. Okay, so Laban still gets to keep all of the more perfect ones, perfect colored ones, and then these rare ones that come out with these discolorations, the speckles and the spots, and maybe it's the wrong color, a brown or a black sheep. Um, Whenever one of those happens, they have less value anyways. So whenever one of those comes along, Jacob will take that, and Laban gets to keep all of the pure ones. So this sounds like a great deal for Laban, right? The vast majority of these animals are going to be Laban's, and then only these variations are going to be what Jacob gets, and that would be his wage. So Laban seems like this deal, this is going to be great And it's easy to track because if Laban is ever concerned that Jacob might be stealing animals from him, he can just go out and look at the flocks, right? If it's got these uh, pure colors and no speckles or spots, then hey, that's stolen. We both know it. But it's easy enough to tell, these are speckled and spotted, those belong to Jacob. So it seems like Jacob is angling for something here, and it seems like Laban is also angling for something. They both think they're getting the better part of the deal here, um, which makes sense because these guys are very similar as far as both being kind of deceitful and underhanded. Um, they're both trying to get the better of each other. The whole thing makes sense. Um, Picking up at verse 34, Laban said, "Oh, that it were according to your word." In other words, he's agreeing. This sounds like a deal, he says. Uh, Verse 35, so he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and he gave them into the hands of his sons. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So Jacob is thinking, okay, we already have some of these discolored animals. I can breed them and they'll be my wages. And I can do this at the same time that I'm shepherding Laban's pure colored flock. And we can breed them and then his wages will come out of there. So we're both going to have, prosperity through this. But Laban's a tricky guy. So all of the discolored animals in his flock, rather than letting Jacob breed those to become his, he moved them to his son's camps 3 days away. So Jacob has to start from scratch with pure colored animals, hoping that there will be eventually some variation with some speckles and spots and stripes that he can that then he can claim those for his. So it's going to be very slow going to try to build up any sort of value or flock size. At least in Laban's mind, that's how it would work. Um, but leaving them 3 days away, that's going to come back and bite him a little bit, Laban that is, later on. But we'll get to that. Picking up there in verse 37. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white stripes in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. So those would be Jacob's wages that are coming from this particular thing. Now we got to keep in mind that Jacob is a skilled shepherd, right? That's what he did when he lived with his father Isaac. He was the shepherd. And as soon as he showed up to Laban's land, he met with the shepherdess Rachel, who was also a shepherd, and he took over that flock, and it grew exponentially because of how skillful he was as a shepherd. So he knew what he was doing here. Um, but obviously, the Lord is also at work in this, blessing it. Verse 40, then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. So he's wanting to separate them, um, and we'll get to why. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. In other words, he's figuring out which animals are stronger and weaker, and he's also figuring out which ones uh, can have discolored offspring. So you want your stronger animals that have the ability to produce discolored offspring um, breeding together. And that would that would raise the strength of that particular line, which then in turn would raise the strength and value of the flock. And it works like a scale. As the one gets stronger, Jacob's flock, the other uh, would get weaker, and that would be Laban's flock. And that's not by accident. Um, Verse 43, thus the man became exceedingly, this Jacob, became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Okay, well, if he's a shepherd and all he gets is the speckled, spotted, and discolored, where did this other stuff come from? Well, he had so much wealth building up, he was so prosperous from this that he had the ability to then purchase uh, workers, male and female servants. And he also had the ability to purchase camels and donkeys. And we're not talking about two camels and three donkeys or anything like that. Um, Camels were incredibly expensive animals, and he had a lot of them, as we'll get into later. A lot, a lot. Um, so we'll see as time goes on just how much God is blessing Jacob, sometimes even in spite of him. And then we'll move into chapter 31 here. Verse 1. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons. So he overheard Laban's sons talking, right? And they said, Jacob's taken away everything that was our father's, and from what our father had, he acquired all his wealth. In other words, Jacob is basically stealing from our dad, right? His wealth is coming from nowhere except from our. So our family's loss is Jacob's gain. He is gaining through our loss. All right, so they're upset. Obviously, they're upset with him. Uh, they don't like this. So they tell Laban, and he's upset. And then Jacob starts to notice he don't look at me the same anymore. He's upset with me. Um, and it could be, he's starting to feel a little unsafe. And as we've seen before, and we'll see again, Jacob's a little jittery that way. He always, he's always worried uh, about the people that are after him, right? Uh, Boy, does that speak to the times. Um, Verse 4, Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock and said to them, so they call a family meeting, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable towards me like it was before. But the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. So, even though he worked for Leah and Rachel for those first 14 years, we'll find out later that it's 6 more years after that for 20 in total. But these 6 years that he's actually getting wages, his wages have been changed 10 times. Remember, it originally started off that any of the discolored flock was automatically Jacob's. And then we find out in chapter 31, verse 8, uh, if he said the speckled will be your wages, then all the flocks were speckled. And then Laban would change the deal and he'd say the streaked are now your wages. And then all the flocks were streaked. So Laban kept trying to change the deal because Jacob was getting such a better end of it. But every time Laban changed the deal, God would alter the outcome to be in Jacob's favor. And if we skipped over, let's go back here. I did skip over verse 3. Uh, Before Jacob called Rachel and Leah to the field, the Lord showed up to him in verse 3, and he said, Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. So that's why Jacob has this meeting, is because um, God told him, Time's up. All right, 20 years, right? It's time to go back. This is not the promised land. The promised land is where you left, where you fled away from Esau. It's time to go back there. He's built up, uh, he's built up this wealth for Jacob there, and now it's time for him to move him back into the land. Okay. Um, Up to verse 10 here. It happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, The rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and spotted. And then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. Then he said, Lift your eyes now and see. All the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. So that's kind of he expands on what the conversation was in verse 3 between him and the Lord. Now, some people might look at verse 11 there, chapter 31, verse 11. They say, The angel of God spoke to me in a dream. This is God, okay? The angel, the messenger of God, spoke to me in a dream. This is the Lord himself. And it says so in verse 13, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar. We remember that when Jacob was on his way to this land. He anointed that pillar there after he saw uh, the Lord on his way there. Uh, and he says, You made where you made a vow to me. So not only does he say, I am the God of Bethel, then he says, Where you made a vow to me. So this angel of God or messenger of God is the Lord. Okay, and we see that throughout the Old Testament. Um, Picking up in verse 14, then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us, and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to do, do it. Okay, so these women are trusting in God. They see that so the bride price that Jacob paid was the working, the 14 years, which only added and built up wealth for Laban and his family as far as inheritance, but the daughters weren't going to get that inheritance. The sons were. So the daughters have no inheritance through their father right now. Um, and they're saying, you know, it's God did this to where now we get an inheritance. It's through Jacob and our children. This is our inheritance. And he has taken this wealth from our father and given it to us. All right, this is God's doing. Everybody here realizes it, including Laban, realizes that this is God's doing. Uh, Picking back up at verse 17, they've decided as a family, for maybe the only time that they've all been unanimous on something. Since remember all the bickering and infighting in the family, who's loved, who has children, all of this stuff. Uh, they do come to a unanimous decision. If God said it's time to go, let's go. All right. They're part of Jacob's house now, not Laban's house anymore. All right. When they become married, they transfer from Laban's house to Jacob's house, and that's how that works. So verse 17, then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind is Jacob was hired by Laban. So he's not only abandoning his father-in-law and his house that he's been living at for 20 years, he's also abandoning his job. And this is not a 2 weeks notice. He just got up and left. Okay, so this is not the right way to go about this, but it's how it happened. Um, all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep. Okay, now that would take a long time. If he's shearing the sheep, we're talking hours, maybe days, depending on how many sheep there were. And Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. Now, did Rachel worship those idols? Is that why she stole them? It doesn't seem that way. No. Um, it seems like she was doing that for a specific purpose, right? So in that culture, your household gods or your household idols in these pagan areas would be a large representation of who that person or family was, right? The idols themselves wouldn't be really large. They would be what we might call knickknacks, right? Or little, you know, little decorations, whatever. But they would have them displayed prominently, right? So they would either be like at the doorpost, so people knew that this family or this idol lived here, or they would be prominently inside. So when you'd go in, this would be like on display, like the house would belonged to this idol, right? And sometimes they would even change their names to match the names of whatever the idol was. Um, the the interesting thing is that they're so prominent in those cultures that once the head of a house died and all his possessions would be passed, you know, the oldest usually would get the larger inheritance, but the whoever got the idols or household gods, which in certainly almost every case would be the oldest, but regardless of who they went to, that person would have the right to claim that property, right? So it seems like Rachel may have taken those to kind of hedge her bets if something went wrong with this journey away from Laban. Then when he died, she could always just go back there and claim that she was the heir to that property because she had the household gods of that property. That seems like the reason why she would do that. Nothing as far as doing it out of spite or anything like that, or that she wanted to worship them. We have nothing to point us in that direction at all. So this seems like the reason that she would have taken them. Um, we'll pick up here at verse 22. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Now, why was he told on the third day? Why wasn't he told on the first day? Well, because it took 3 days for them to be able to tell him, because he put 3 days journey when he separated the flocks to keep Jacob from getting a head start with the striped and spotted. He intentionally put that 3 day journey in between them. Laban did, and it bit him here because now he's 3 days behind after Jacob leaves. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. So it took 7 days. He did eventually catch up with him because men that are what likely would be riding animals to pursue them, even if they weren't, if they were running, these men are going to move at a much faster pace than Jacob and his children and all of their flocks. You can't drive the flocks like that. You have to maintain a nice easy pace. You have to let them rest, feed, water. So Jacob with all these flocks cannot move at a speed that would outrun Laban uh, and his men, um, which is why it's so valuable to have that 3 day head start to get such a head start and away from that land. Um, but he caught up with him, right? Um, in verse 24, though, God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad." And that's interesting, right? I could understand, okay, God tells Laban not to say anything bad to Jacob. I get it, right? Uh, we don't have a problem with that. But why would God not want Laban to say anything good to him either? Well, if we look a little bit deeper into it, we understand Laban is cunning, right? He's a trickster, just like Jacob. And if given the opportunity to say anything good to him, he might just try to sweet talk him into coming back, uh, offer him this, offer him that, even if it wasn't true, saying whatever he needed to say to get him to go back. And God clearly wants him back at Bethel. He wants him back in the promised land. He does not want him with Laban any longer. So he says, don't speak good or bad. He doesn't want him trying to sweet talk him back in. He says, this deal is over. Okay. Verse 25, Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have stolen away unknown to? So he left without telling him, is what he's saying, and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword. He didn't do that. Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and did not tell me? Jacob is guilty of that, though, isn't he? It wasn't right for him to just leave without saying anything. For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp, and you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in this. So, A, Laban was not going to let them go. Everybody in the conversation knows it, right? He's trying to save face because he's probably embarrassed. He's embarrassed in front of his daughters, his grandchildren. He's embarrassed in front of his men that are with him, right? He is supposed to be the head of this entire family, and now his role is being usurped by Jacob, taking part of that away, right? Why didn't you let me kiss my sons and my daughters and send you away with music? Laban wasn't going to do any of those things. He's trying to save face. You know, he's just talking. Verse 29, it is in my power to do you harm. He's right. Okay? So if you had a, a person working for you, a shepherd, let's say, working for you, and he abandons the flock and just leaves and takes your daughters with him, um, yeah, he probably did have the right in that culture to kill Jacob. Uh, However, uh, God of your father spoke to me last night. Okay, now we know why he's not hurting him. God said, be careful you do not speak to Jacob, neither good or bad. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? So Laban's saying, okay, it, I have the right to hurt you because of what you've done, but I'm not going to because your God said not to. Fine. And I understand that you're homesick and you want to go back to your father's house. Fine. But why did you steal my gods? Right? Remember, Rachel took those. Jacob doesn't know anything about this at this time. Right? Uh, Verse 31, Jacob answered and said to Laban, and right now he's speaking of why he left without saying anything. He said, because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. So Jacob's probably telling the truth, a rare occasion here, because Laban probably would have tried to do that. Verse 32, but with whoever you find your gods, don't let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know Rachel had stolen them. So we have Laban, the head of his house, uh, trying to save face because he's being embarrassed by Jacob sneaking off with his daughters and grandchildren and leaving the flocks and a lot of things. So Laban's embarrassed, but he accused Jacob then. And remember, all of this is happening in front of both of their people groups. And he accuses Jacob openly in front of everybody of stealing his gods. So now Jacob is also offended because now he's been called a thief. Um, and we see in verse 36, then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. Now, you'll notice that I did skip uh, the section in between here. We are making this uh, I have some younger children, and so we do have to kind of be sensitive on certain subjects. So I did skip this in between this part from verse 33 to 35, where it speaks of Rachel having them and why Laban couldn't find them. But what it boils down to is Jacob lets Laban search everything. Laban doesn't find them. As far as Jacob knows, Laban doesn't find them because they're not there. Rachel's the only one that knows that they're there. So that's why Jacob's so mad. He's been accused of something he didn't do, um, and he's all of this built up animosity is really starting to come out. Verse 38, these 20 years I have been with you, your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock, which normally a shepherd would be allowed to do. Okay, most times a shepherd uh, does get to eat from the flock. Jacob didn't do that. Okay. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Again, normally a hired shepherd, if one of the flock was killed by another animal, they just had to bring the carcass to the owner to explain what happened, and then it would not be the fault of the shepherd. Okay. Verse 40, there I was. In the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Jacob's right on that. Um, Certainly, if God didn't talk to Laban, he he would have sent Jacob away. At the very best, he would have sent him away empty-handedly. More likely, he would have just killed him. But God rebuked him. Verse 43, then Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahudetha, but Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name was called Galeed, also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me, when we are absent from one another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. So Laban's saying, me and you are going to make a covenant. And even if we're not around each other, God knows what's really happening. So God's going to be the witness of our covenant that you're not going to have any other wives besides my daughters. And he adds on to it here, starting in verse 51. Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain, and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban rose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to this place. So God really was with Jacob there. Laban went there to do him harm and was stopped. Uh, we've come out of it with a covenant, a deal, an agreement between Jacob and his people and Laban and his people. The agreement included that Jacob would have no other wives besides Laban's daughters, and it included that where that heap was set up, neither one would, they would use that as a boundary. Neither one would cross to the other side to do the other harm. We have a boundary line. Okay. And then it seems like Laban went back in peace, probably upset, still over the loss, but at least satisfied in that this was the way that God ordained it, and this was the way it was going to be. So he just dealt with it. Now, coming to verse 32. So keep in mind, this is all happening while Jacob is headed out of that land and he's going back home to the promised land. Remember that the entire reason that he's not in the promised land right now is because he was running away from Esau. Esau wanted to kill him. That's why he fled to Laban's in the first place 20 years ago, right? But the last time Jacob saw Esau, he was in fear of his life. So since he's going back to the promised land, he needs to see, you know, he needs to figure out, test the water. Does Esau still want to kill me? What's this going to be like? Because I have to go back to the land. God told me to. So chapter 32, verse 1, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And Jacob saw them, and he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Now, we're off to a good start. Jacob is doing what God told him to do. He's headed the right direction. Angels of God met him there. He seems encouraged. He's edified. This is God's camp, right? Verse 3, then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, "Speak this to my lord Esau." So already you see that Jacob is putting himself in a position of submission to Esau to try to smooth things over. Jacob knows that he has the birthright and that the promise is going to go through him. Esau knows that Jacob has the birthright, right? Everybody knows. But Jacob is still putting himself a step lower under Esau to try to gain goodwill, good favor from him, right? And he commanded, so Jacob telling his messengers, "Say this to Esau. This is what your servant Jacob says. I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord," speaking to Esau, "I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." Then the messengers, so he's basically, "Hey, Jacob's on his way. He wanted to send you a message first. Um, Look at all this stuff," right? Verse 6, then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Okay, well, so Esau got the message. Check that off the box. Esau's still around, and we found him. We delivered the message that you said. Now he's coming out to meet you, and 400 men are with him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into two companies. And he said, "If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, the other company which is left will escape." Okay, so Jacob is already planning for failure, right? He's preparing for disaster. Instead of trusting what God has already told him, he's preparing for failure instead, right? How many times do we do that, right? Trust that God has a plan. Trust that his will work out to the benefit of anybody that loves him, right? That his will is always going to be accomplished according to his purpose through us, whether we bungle it or not, right? If we are hard-headed enough, it may have to go through somebody else, but his will is going to get done. All right, all we have to do is trust it, believe it, and just do what he asks us to do. Okay. Picking up verse 9, Jacob said, right, so so Jacob's planning for this failure, and he's tried everything that he could think of to smooth things over, right? He's made this offering to Esau. He's submitted himself to Esau. Um, he's run out of ideas. So what do we tend to do when we run out of ideas and the situation's not getting any better, right? That's when we pray. Not how we're supposed to. Not not how we're supposed to pray in all situations. No, we want to see if we can do this our own way, handle this by ourselves, right? We don't want to get God involved until we really need Him. That's not the way it's supposed to be, right? We're supposed to constantly be talking to God and working to know and do His will. We're not supposed to wait until it seems like everything's lost and then rely on Him. But that's what Jacob does here, right? He's distressed. So in verse 9, he starts praying. Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, Return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now have become two companies. So he's off to a good start here, anyways, right? He recognizes that this God, the God of his family, right, the God that told him to leave, that I'm not worthy of the least of all your mercies, right? But he gave it to him anyways. Okay. And in when he crossed over the Jordan, all he had was his staff. But now he's coming back so wealthy, he's in two companies, two camps, two groups. He has so many possessions. Verse 11, Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So Jacob's reminding God that he made this promise to him. Jacob's pretty worried about this Esau thing. God's not worried about it, right? Verse 13. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau his brother. So so this is the gift, or you could call bribe, uh, that Jacob is sending to Esau to again to try to smooth things out, to try to save himself from being attacked. He sent, verse 14, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 foals. That's a lot. That is that is an amount that would make the recipient rich immediately. That is nice, right? Jacob's sending all this to Esau just to try to smooth things over. Verse 16, Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and he said to his servants, Go over before me, and put some distance between successive droves. And he commanded the first one, saying, When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, To whom do you belong, and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, They are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us. So Jacob is sending all of these gifts by way of flock. Uh, he's sending them in groups, in sections. Look at this group of items and this group of all of this livestock that he's sending to Esau, one group at a time, and he has servants with each group to explain, this is Jacob's, giving it to you, a gift. Okay. And he has it set up to where, boom, look at this big group, it's yours. Wait, here comes another. Boom, another big group, it's yours. Wait, here comes another. Right, succession of droves. So much. Um, Verse 19, So he commanded the second and the third, and all who followed the droves, saying, In this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him, and also say, Behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So Jacob sends all of this stuff first to kind of butter up Esau, so that when Jacob comes at the end, Esau's buttered up, right? He's feeling good. He will accept Jacob then. Okay. Verse 21. So the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. Oh, I wonder if anything interesting is going to happen there. And he arose that night and took his two wives. We know that Jacob had four wives, right? But we're talking the two, Rachel and Leah, that he worked for. And then it says his two female servants. He had many female servants, but he's talking here about the concubines, right? Uh, Rachel had her uh, maid, and Leah had her maid. These are those two servants, those two concubines, the mother of some of Jacob's children. Uh, and his 11 sons. Some translations are going to say 11 children. That's incorrect. We have 11 sons. We have at minimum 12 children because we have 11 sons and Dinah, and we don't know how many other daughters were unlisted. Dinah was likely only listed because of the part that she would play later on. So there could have been more. We really don't know. So he sent them over. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone. So he sends everything, all of his family, his possessions, everything he sends across. Jacob is the only thing left on that side of the Jordan. Then Jacob was left alone. A man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Verse 24, this man. Hmm. Who is the man that wrestled with Jacob? Let's look at it a little further. Now when he, the man, when he saw that he did not prevail against him, Jacob, he, the man, touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said to him, Let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Let's stop there. Who is the man that wrestled with Jacob? Well, it seems like this is the Lord himself. It's the second person in the Trinity, right? Pre-incarnate Jesus, right? The angel of the Lord, the Old Testament, the image of the invisible God, right? So when God comes in human form, this is that. This is that being. This is him. This is God in human form. Okay? We have a reference to this in Hosea. Really, the reference is from chapter 12. It's from verse 2 to 6, I believe. But really, verses 3 to 4 are specifically about this exact thing. Okay, so we can reference that if you need to. But it seems to me obvious that this is the Lord. Some people say if it was God, why couldn't he prevail against him? Because we see here uh, in verse 25, whoever this person is did not prevail against Jacob. Okay, well, if it was God, he would prevail against Jacob, right? No way Jacob could put up that good of a fight against God. Okay, so let's start with the obvious things. The Almighty God that can speak everything into existence with a word. Yes, he can prevail against Jacob. Now that that's out of the way, what does this mean? Okay, we see that he touched the socket of his hip and it was out of joint. Okay, so your hip takes the strongest bone in your body, right? Your thigh bone, and the strongest joint in your body, which is in your hip. And this being touched it and knocked it out of socket. This is something you only see from like a fall from a very high height, or maybe a car accident, something like this. This an incredible amount of force to do this. Okay, this is not something generally that you would find during a wrestling match or a fight, regardless of how violent it was. Okay, but it was touched, and it was touched right out of socket. This is the Lord. Okay, it seems like this was the Lord testing Jacob, um, much like he tested Abraham, right? Only in a different kind of way. He wants to see what Jacob's will is. Is he willing to put up a fight, right? Is he willing to learn a lesson here? Okay. Um, The way that Jacob struggled with God here, sometimes we struggle with things, right? We all have to go through struggles, right? They're in different circumstances. They may be to different levels of severity, but we all have to struggle through some things, all right? And in order to get to where we are in God's will, a lot of times we have to struggle to get to that point. And then in those times, some people just give up, right? They may abandon the faith. I'm tired. I'm tired of struggling. It's hard. I give up. All right. Jacob didn't do that. Right. And we have multiple verses that talk about our endurance and he who endures to the end. Right. So we need to understand that there are going to be struggles and that God will bring us through those struggles. Okay. Um, Verse 27, the Lord speaking, he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." He said, "Your name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Okay. So, if you have struggled from God, with God and men, what are we talking about? Well, if we believe that the person in this passage, this being, if we're to believe that this is God, okay, well, this is God. Now, by prevail, do we mean that he beat God? No. Picture prevail being more of withstanding the test. He withstood the test. Okay. So we have the God, but who is the and with men? Even from the womb, Jacob struggled with men. Esau, while still in the womb, Jacob struggled with. All right. And that's his life, largely defined by his struggles. Um, After the encounter, God changed his name to Israel. Now, we remember before when God changed Abram's name to Abraham, that was it. We never see Abram brought up again. It was Abraham from there on out. The entire rest of the Bible references back to Abraham, not Abram. Okay, once his name was changed, it was changed. Now, conversely, Jacob, even though God just changed his name to Israel, at different points in the scriptures, it's going to refer back to Israel and Jacob. These names are going to be used in different contexts, usually, and always referring to the same person or people group, but in different ways. So we'll usually see that if it's talking about uh, Israel, whether as a person or as a nation, if it's in a good context, usually Israel. But usually in a sinful context, it's referred to as Jacob. The person and the nation is referred to as Jacob. That's an interesting thing to keep an eye on as we continue to move forward. Um, to finish out chapter 32 here, um, verse 29, Jacob asked him, saying, "Tell me your name." And he said, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" That's interesting. The Lord did not give him his name there. And he blessed him there, though. God blessed him. If this was a man, if this was an angel, it wouldn't it wouldn't read this way. This is God blessing Jacob. Verse 30, Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Everybody knew that if you saw God's face, you died. The end. Nobody sees God's face, or you die. The end. This is why this is why God chose to appear to us in a form that we could understand periodically throughout history. For a short period in history, for about 33 years, he came as a person that we called Jesus. But that was not the beginning and end of the image of God. We see that he has also come in bodily form before that. And we know that he will also come in bodily form later. And we have some descriptions of what that form is. And other than those 33 years, those descriptions uh, pretty much all line up. Um those 33 years looking more like us. Um, there is a difference. What I'm trying to get at is people think when the image of God showed up in the Old Testament, he showed up as a man, all right? When he showed up in the person of Jesus, he showed up as a man, not likely not the same man. He probably looked different than he did in the previous ones. He could show up looking however he wants to look, but as a man. Okay, this is so that we can understand, so he can have an encounter and talk to us face to face without us just dying immediately. Um, but we see that that same person that showed up as a man in the Old Testament and as a man in the person of Jesus, that person is still God, and we will again be face to face with that same God, uh, and he's not going to look like a man anymore. He's going to be in the form of a man, right? But flames of fire is not a normal description for a man. But I don't want to divert too far into this. We have the second person of the Trinity. He wrestles with Jacob, changes his name. Um, there are other views there. I don't accept them. Um, some would say he wrestled with Satan. Why would he ask Satan for a blessing? Makes no sense. Some say he wrestled with an angel. Okay, so do you mean a messenger? That messenger is the angel of the Lord that shows up many times. That messenger is the Lord. Okay, so um, I've gotten off track. Let's reel it back in a little bit here. He touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the muscle that shrank. This is why the children of Israel do not, uh, still to this day, don't eat the sinew, because that's the spot that the Lord touched to knock Jacob's hip out. All right, chapter 33. Okay, verse 1. Now Jacob lifted up his eyes. So we just finished the encounter with the Lord. Okay. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. So Jacob prioritized his family in the order of how he valued them, on how expendable they were. Do you think they noticed that he put the maids and their children at the front so that if they were attacked, they would be attacked first, right? And then Leah next, and her children, okay? And then Rachel, his favorite wife, the one that he loved, with Joseph, who would be his favorite son because it was Rachel's son. They're in the back, they're the safest. Do you think that his family didn't notice the way that he just prioritized them in the order that they were expendable? If they have to die, die in this order. Okay, that's not good. That's not good. Verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him. Well, there's a surprise, right? And fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the children and the women and said, Who are these who are with you? So he said, These children, whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservants came near, and they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children, and bowed down. Afterward, Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. Right? So all this worry by Jacob is for no reason. Esau's happy to see him. Turns out Esau's pretty well off in what he's been doing the last 20 years, too. Okay? There was no need for all this. It's Jacob being Jacob. Um, so the only thing he accomplished by doing this is to create more problems in the family by letting each person in his house know exactly where they ranked on his scale. It's nothing good. Verse 8, then Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? And he said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Basically, he's saying, why are you sending all these gifts to me? What's the deal? And Jacob's saying, I wanted some favor. I wanted to find favor in your sight, so I gave you these gifts. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. And Jacob said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, receive my present from my hand. And as much as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me, please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and I have enough. So he urged him, and he took it. So Jacob's still wanting just to make sure everything is all good between him and Esau. He urges him, please just take this stuff so that we're good. Accept my gifts. Then, verse 12, then Esau said, let us take our journey. Let us go, and I will go before you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak and the flocks and herds. So he's coming up with his excuses now. Esau, who came from Seir, wants Jacob to come back with him. Come back here, come see the place, maybe even stay here a while. Uh, there's plenty of land out that way. I'm doing good, you're doing good. Come with me. And Jacob says, no, I can't because the flocks and the kids, I got to move a little slower. You go ahead. I'll meet you there. Right? Then Esau's saying, well, maybe I'll just leave some men with you. Maybe they can help out or protect or whatever. And Jacob's saying, no, there's no need. We're all good back here. You guys go on ahead. We'll be along shortly. I'm going to move at a nice slow pace, because of the flocks and the kids. So Jacob, again, still living up to his name, being dishonest. He has no intention of going Seir. As far as we know, he never does go to Seir. I believe the only other time we see these two meeting back up again is when they bury Isaac. Um, so he wants to make sure everything's good with Esau. It seems just so that he can be secure in the idea that Esau is not going to at some point attack him. Other than that, it doesn't seem like he's interested at all in being near him or in his town. Um, so Esau goes back to Seir. He thinks that Jacob's coming. Jacob doesn't go there. Instead, Jacob goes to uh, the city where Shechem lives. He buys land there. Um, Now, they are in the promised land at this point. Okay. Um, and we remember that Abraham, he bought land too when he had to bury Sarah. Are they gonna buy the promised land piece by piece? Uh, but Jacob, even though he's in the promised land, he's not in the area he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be heading to Bethel. What's he doing buying land uh, in the city where Shechem lives? Uh, he's diverting from the plan. Okay, and that's going to come with consequences, as it usually does. If God has a plan, if God tells us, go here, go there, and we say, you know what, this is probably good enough, or this is probably close enough, be prepared for some consequences. And there were consequences here. Now, chapter 34 um, is going to be more of a commentary, again, because of the nature of this chapter. And I want this to be uh, children friendly, right? We should be able to, younger children, they can receive the word without needing some of the details. If you're a little bit older and you want the details, read chapter 34 on your own for some of the specifics. Otherwise, we will make the points that need made uh, without so much being graphic. Okay, so instead of going to Seir, Jacob and his group, they go to the land of Shechem. All right. Now Shechem is kind of an evil guy. Um, and when he sees Dinah, Jacob's daughter, the one that we know about, maybe not the only one, maybe it is the only one, but it's the one we know about. And this is why we know about her. She went out among the women there. It seems like she was probably trying to make some friends. It was probably lonely for a daughter with all these sons running around. She probably, it seems like she was looking for some of the, it says she went out to see the daughters of the land. So it seems like maybe she was looking for friends or companionship with the other women there. Whatever the case may be, Shechem saw her and he took her. Um, and he kept her for a time against her will. Uh, and and that was the wrong thing to do. And when Jacob found out about that, his sons were in the field. Remember, these are shepherds. So his sons are in the field working. So Jacob is waiting for them to come back. And when the sons come back to Jacob, they discuss this that happened, and they're very upset. It seems like mainly just the sons were upset. Jacob seems to have checked out. It's unclear why he seems so passive about this. Her brothers were not passive about it. Um, so Shechem has his father Hamor uh, go meet with Jacob. All right, so they go meet with Jacob. They explain what happened. To them it seems like it's no big deal. My son, he loves your daughter. What's the problem? Uh, Give her to him, uh, so that they can get married. And you know what? Not only that, why don't we why don't we just your people group and my people group, why don't we just intermarry? We can make our two clans one larger, stronger group. We can share our trades. We can share this and share that, and you can marry our women, and we can marry your women, and we can just all kind of coexist, right? Um, that's not God's plan. God's plan is to keep the Hebrews, to keep Jacob's line separate from these other people, not to combine into one group. Not yet. For this period in history, they need to be separate. Um, so instead of just outright declining their offer, what Jacob's family decides is, you know what, we can't do this because your men are not like our men, due to some of the laws that our men need to keep. Now we don't have the law yet, but we know what I'm talking about here. Okay, um, so your men aren't like our men, so we can't do that. But if you can talk all of your men into becoming like our men, then we can come to an agreement, and we'll do what you say. And of course, Shechem, he wants Dinah, so he talks everybody in that city into becoming like the Hebrew men. Um, but it turns out it was just all part of a plan. So after they do this, Simeon and Levi, 3 days later, it says, 3 days later, they went into the city while all the men are still healing up. They're all probably laying in bed, still in quite a bit of pain. Nobody wants to get up, right? It's very painful. Simeon and Levi, and possibly the other brothers, but we know for sure those two, went into the city and attacked and killed every man in that city. Every one. Not just Shechem and his dad, every man in that city. Not only did they do that, they took all the women, they took all the children, they took all the livestock and animals, they took all of the stuff from the houses, all the riches. They took everything, plundered the city completely, which is not rare for when there is a battle from a group to another group. The winner, there's a saying, to the winner goes the spoils. The winner of a conflict like this would naturally plunder the city. That doesn't make it okay that they did this. Okay. Again, this group of people is supposed to be separate from the world. And that means actions too. They shouldn't act the way that the other cultures act. Um, so they attack, they kill everybody, or they kill the men, they take the women and children, um, and uh, and they take him back to their group. And now Jacob's mad. But Jacob's not mad about, it doesn't seem like he's mad about what happened to Dinah. It seems like he's only mad about how they responded to it. He's only mad because now these other groups around them, around that city, they're going to know what happened. They're going to hear about it. And then maybe they'll want vengeance. Maybe they want to attack Jacob and his group now. So now Jacob, he goes from one worry to another, right? From Laban to Esau, and now these surrounding cities. Uh, always worried about something, but he seems to only be upset because he doesn't want the other cultures around, the other cities around, to hear about it and then attack him. Uh, he just what a what a it's not. I don't want to say that it's not God's will because God can use sin to accomplish His will. But what I will say is we need to make sure before we do things, we need to check and say, I know that I want revenge, or I know that I want to do this thing, or I know that I want to obtain this thing. What is God's purpose? The thing some years back when everybody, the What Would Jesus Do bracelets and all that, um, it might sound corny, but really, what would he do? Not that, not that. Um, so what we learn out of that is, you know, maybe Jacob wasn't mad enough. His sons were, but he wasn't, it seems. But regardless, they all had a right to be angry, but they did not have a right to vengeance. And we know that. They were not told to attack those people by the Lord. If they had been told, then obviously that would have been the right thing, but they weren't told to attack them. We see in Ephesians 4:26, Paul says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger." So it's okay to be angry, okay? But there is a line between being so mad that you sin and being, what they call a righteous anger. So being angry at this situation and what happened to Dinah, that's righteous anger. But it has to stop there. Okay? They did not have the right to vengeance. We know this from Paul's letters to the Romans, chapter 12, verse 18 and 19. Says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Now, people are going to say, well, we can't live peaceably with them because of what happened to Dinah. Okay, that did happen, but you can still live peaceably with them after that. That's the whole point of this scripture, is that sometimes it's not going to feel good to live peaceably with people that do evil to you. Okay, but as far as depends on you, you do it anyways. All right. That's what that scripture means. It doesn't mean, well, they don't want to live peaceably with me, so I'm not going to live peaceably. That's not what that means. That's exactly the opposite of what that means. This says regardless, right? As no matter what that evil person does or is doing, as much as it depends on you, you live peaceably with all. Everybody wants to, you know, try to fight for God. He doesn't need you to fight for him unless he tells you to. And if he's telling you to live peaceably, maybe we should go in that direction instead of always wanting to start a war, uh, you know, of any kind. Uh, when peace is an option, we just don't want to do it, right? I don't want to live peaceably with that person. They offend me. Okay, says the pagan, not the Christian. As far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. But more to the point on this passage is verse 19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And we get that scripture over and over and over. A couple other references to that uh, is Hebrews chapter 10, verse 30. And then we will find that later on in the Torah in Deuteronomy 32:35. God is very clear on this. Vengeance is not ours. We don't take revenge. Okay? We turn the other cheek. We take up our cross. We don't take revenge. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. There's the revenge. Okay? Us carrying out vengeance is just an amount of sin that the evil done to us that makes us want to get that revenge. Okay? You repay evil with evil? I thought we were told not to do that. Didn't Jesus say repay evil with good? Okay? His rules for us: live peaceably with all as much as it depends on us. And that means we try. That doesn't mean, well, they don't want to. No. Stop twisting scripture. Live peaceably. Never avenge yourselves. Leave it to the wrath of God. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. We need to trust that God will not uh, abandon us, and that at some point in time, God's wrath is going to be carried out. We don't want it carried out on our enemies. It might feel like it, oh, I can't wait until somebody such and such gets their comeuppance. Finally they deserve that. Brother, I deserve that, and you deserve that. We all deserve that. What we need to pray for is mercy. Our mercy, our enemy's mercy, right? If we only want mercy for the people we love, if we only want good things for the people that we love, people that we would consider friends, we are the same as the pagan. Jesus says so, right? Even the tax collectors do that, okay? We are set apart because if somebody does evil to us, we A, leave the revenge to the Lord if he decides to, when he decides to. Our responsibility is to love that person, to pray for that person, and to love that person regardless of what they did. That is our command. We need to stop twisting scripture. All right. What should they have done? Same thing that we all should do and struggle with. Romans goes on to say, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. Verse 21 goes on to say, do not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So if somebody does something evil to us and we want to get them back, then that's us being overcome by evil. We don't want to be overcome by evil. We're told not to be overcome by evil. Why do we want to repay evil for evil all the time? Because it feels good? Does it really, though? It feels good in an instant, and that's all. And then that guilt sets in, right? Because now both parties are guilty of that sin. Overcome evil with good. That's tough. Can you imagine something like happened to Dinah happens to somebody in your family, and what you're told to do is to not get revenge and to not do something to get them back, but what you're told to do is to pray for that person, to love that person, to if they're hungry, to feed that person, if they're thirsty, to give drink to that person, even after what they did to Dinah, right? Overcome evil with good. I say this: is there a better testimony if you could, by the grace of God, manage to actually do this, to live this out, to be to be that in step with God's will, that if something like that happened to somebody in your family, you would be able to still stay in his will and to do these things. Well, you're on the path to sanctification, right? What a testimony. What a testimony that you would have to that person and anybody else that knew about it. And they say, someday down the road, they might say, oh man, what I did was terribly wrong, but you know what? They forgave me. I did the worst thing to that girl and they forgave me. and everything else I did, and they forgave me. I got to know what that's about. You understand why the Lord tells us to do these things? That testimony is strong. We need to be the example that Christ told us to be. It's hard. It's not easy. It doesn't say it'll be easy. It says it'll be hard. Turns out that's all true, right? Hard to do this. Think of the testimony though. Think of what you can accomplish for the Lord if you just do what he's saying. All right? Let us all be that way. Amen.